Hello, my dear ones. Welcome to Mama Joyce's Stories, a quiet place where heart speaks softly and memories find their way home. Here, I share tales of love, loss, forgiveness, and the gentle lessons life leaves behind. So make yourself a cup of tea, settle in, and let your heart rest for a while. Now, my dear ones, let's move toward our story for today. When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I didn't cry. I stood there, looking at her face, and for a moment I couldn't believe those words had really come from her. She said it so calmly, like she was asking me to pass the salt, but her eyes told the truth. She wanted me gone. I didn't ask why. I just nodded and said I understood. My son wasn't home that morning. He had left early, like he always did. Maybe she waited for that. Maybe she knew it would be easier without him there. I picked up my small bag, the same one I brought when I first moved into their house. I thought it was just for a few weeks back then. I never thought I'd leave carrying it again. When I stepped outside, it was raining lightly. I remember looking up at the sky and whispering to myself, "So this is how it ends." The rain hid my tears, and for that, I was grateful. I wasn't always this woman, tired, quiet, and unwanted. Once I was someone's whole world. I was a mother who believed love never fades. I thought no one could ever turn my son's heart away from me. I was wrong. I had only one child, my son Daniel. He was my miracle. I had him after years of praying and trying. The doctor had told me I might never have children, but God had other plans. When I first held him, I promised him everything I had, every bit of love in my heart. When his father died, Daniel was only 9 years old. It was just two of us after that. Life wasn't easy, but Daniel gave me strength. I worked 2 jobs to make sure he had what he needed. I worked mornings in the school cafeteria and evenings sewing clothes for the neighbors. Every night when I came home tired, Daniel would be sitting at the kitchen table doing his homework. He'd look up and say, "Mama, you work too hard. One day I'll make enough money so you can rest." I used to smile and tell him, "That's what every mother loves to hear." And I meant it. Those words kept me going. Daniel grew up into a fine man, kind, respectful, gentle. He never forgot to call me, even when he was away at college. He always ended every call with, "I love you, Mama." I would sit on the porch after those calls, smiling and thanking God for giving me a son like him. When he graduated, I felt proud. I thought all those years of sacrifice had finally been worth it. He got a good job, moved to the city, and soon after, he called me to tell me about a girl he'd met. Her name was Rachel. I still remember that day. He sounded happy, so full of life. "Mama," he said, "she's different. She's kind and smart. You'll like her." And I wanted to. When he brought her home for the first time, I did everything to make her feel welcome. I cooked her favorite food, set the table with my best dishes, and even wore the blue dress Daniel always said made me look nice. Rachel was polite, soft-spoken, and smiled a lot. Maybe too much. But I didn't notice then. She helped with the dishes, complimented my cooking, and said she was lucky to meet a woman like me. I believed her. I wanted to. When they got married, Daniel asked me to move in with them. He said, "Mama, you've spent your whole life taking care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of you." Those words melted my heart. I didn't hesitate. I packed my things and moved into their house a week after the wedding. Daniel and Rachel had bought a nice home in a quiet neighborhood. My room was upstairs, with a small window that looked out at the garden. I planted jasmine there because it reminded me of home. The first few months were peaceful. Rachel and I cooked together sometimes. We talked about small things, family, food, TV shows. She called me Mama, and seemed sincere. I thought, maybe I've been blessed with a good daughter-in-law. But slowly, things began to change. It started small. A sigh here, a look there. I'd walk into the kitchen and Rachel would go quiet. Or I'd ask her something and she'd give short answers. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just tired, adjusting to married life. One evening, I was setting the table when she said, "You don't have to cook every night, Mama. We can order in sometimes." I smiled and said, "Oh, I don't mind. Cooking makes me happy." She smiled back, but there was something cold in her eyes. That was the first time I felt it, a distance. After that, small things kept happening. My favorite teacup, the one Daniel gave me on my 50th birthday, disappeared from the shelf. I found it later, chipped, hidden in the back of a cabinet. When I asked about it, she said, "Oh, that old thing? I thought it was just clutter." Clutter. The word stung more than I expected. It wasn't about the cup. It was what it represented. My memories, my place, my worth. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to. Whenever I tried to talk to him, he'd say, "Mama, Rachel's just trying to make the house her home. Give her some time." So I did. I gave her time, but instead of things getting better, they got colder. Rachel's parents visited a weekend. They were nice people, but I could feel how out of place I was. During dinner, her mother said, "You've built such a lovely home, Rachel. You must be proud." Rachel smiled and said, "Yes, we worked hard for it." We. For a moment, I felt invisible. The house Daniel had told me was our home had become theirs. That night, I went to my room and sat by the window. The jasmine flowers had started to bloom, their scent filling the room. I thought about my husband, about how proud he would have been of Daniel, and about how much I missed being needed. It's a strange thing realizing you've become a guest in the very life you helped build. Days turned into weeks. Rachel stopped calling me Mama. She just used my name. At first, I didn't correct her. I told myself it was just a habit, but each time she said it, it felt like a small cut. She started rearranging the kitchen. My old pots, the spice jars I'd used for years, all replaced with new ones. She said she was modernizing things. I remember standing there watching her move my things, feeling like I was fading out of the picture. The home I joined had slowly become a place where I didn't belong. One day, I heard them talking in the living room. Rachel said, "Your mother doesn't give us any space, Daniel. We're newly married, and it feels like she's always around." Daniel's voice was quiet. "She means well, Rachel." Rachel sighed. "I know, but it's hard. I can't relax in my own house." I stood by the stairs, listening, holding my breath. My hands were shaking. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but once you hear your name in that tone, the tone of complaint, you can't walk away. That night, Daniel didn't come to say goodnight like he used to. He stayed in their room. And I lay in mine, staring at the ceiling, realizing something had shifted. He was still my son, but he was no longer mine. Time went on, and things became polite but cold. Rachel spoke to me only when necessary. Daniel seemed caught between us, but slowly I could see him leaning her way. She was gentle in front of him, but distant when we were alone. Once I tried to tell him that she didn't seem happy with me around. He just sighed and said, "Mama, please don't make things difficult. Rachel's been feeling stressed. I just need some peace." Those words hurt more than I can describe. Don't make things difficult, as if loving my son too much had become a problem. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, not loud sobs, just soft tears that come when you finally understand you're losing something you can't hold on to. I had given my whole life to this boy, my energy, my dreams, my youth. I never thought I'd have to beg for a place in his life. A few days later, Rachel didn't come home for dinner. Daniel said she was out with friends. I cooked anyway, hoping maybe she'd change her mind. She didn't. I sat across from Daniel at the table. The silence between us was heavy. I asked, "Do you remember when you used to come home from school and tell me about your day? You talked so fast I couldn't keep up." He smiled faintly and said, "Yeah, those were good days." I wanted to tell him that they still could be, that love doesn't have to fade. But I stayed quiet, because by then, I already knew words couldn't reach where hearts had already closed. The months that followed were heavy. Every day felt a little quieter than the one before. I started to notice how Daniel's tone changed when he spoke to me. It wasn't cruel, just distant, like he was always in a hurry. He still called me Mama, but it sounded more like habit than love. Sometimes I'd wait for him to come home from work so we could have dinner together, but he'd call at the last minute to say he was eating out with Rachel. I'd wrap the food, put it in the fridge, and tell myself not to take it personally. But it's hard not to when you spend your evenings alone in a house you once filled with laughter. One Saturday morning, I was in the garden trimming the jasmine. Rachel came out with a cup of coffee. She stood there for a moment before saying, "You know, Mama, I think Daniel worries about you being out here in the sun too much." I smiled. "Oh, the sun feels nice. Don't worry about me." She nodded, but didn't smile back. Then she added, "You don't have to do all this, you know. We can hire someone to take care of the garden. You should relax." "I like doing it," I said softly. She shrugged and walked back inside. The way she said it made me feel like I was in the way again, like even touching the flowers was too much. That evening, Daniel asked me to sit with him for a bit. He said, "Mama, Rachel thinks you might be overworking yourself. Maybe you should rest more." I knew those weren't his words. He'd never worried about me trimming plants before. He used to say I had the greenest hands in the world. But I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "If it makes her happy, I'll try." Inside, I felt something shift again. It was like Rachel had started building a wall, and Daniel was quietly helping her place the bricks. The distance grew slowly. Rachel began making small remarks, not directly hurtful, but sharp enough to sting. If I forgot to turn off the stove, she'd sigh loudly and say, "You should really be more careful, Mama. Things are different now." If I offered to help with the laundry, she'd smile and say, "It's okay, I've got it." Those little words carried a message I couldn't miss. You're no longer needed. I started spending more time in my room. I'd read, knit, or just stare out the window. Sometimes Daniel would check on me, but those visits got shorter. He'd stand by the door, talk for a minute or two, and then say, "Rachel's waiting for me." I wanted to tell him I missed him, but I was afraid it would sound like guilt instead of love. One night I heard them arguing downstairs. Their voices were low, but I could still make out a few words. Rachel said, "She's always around, Daniel. I can't even relax in my own home." Daniel said something I couldn't hear clearly, and then Rachel's voice rose again. "You don't understand how it feels to live with your mother every day. She's watching everything I do. It's exhausting." My heart sunk. I hadn't realized that my quiet presence could make someone feel trapped. Later that night, Daniel came upstairs and knocked softly on my door. He looked tired. "Mama, can we talk?" I nodded and let him in. He sat at the edge of the bed. "Rachel thinks you might not like her." "I never said that," I answered quickly. "I know," he said, rubbing his forehead. "But maybe you could be a little warmer? She's trying, Mama." I wanted to tell him that I had been trying all along, that I'd been walking on eggshells since the day I moved in. But I stayed silent. Sometimes silence feels safer than truth. He smiled faintly and said, "I just want peace in this house." Then he kissed my forehead and left. When the door closed, I sat there in the quiet, realizing that my son was no longer standing beside me. He was standing beside her. The next few weeks, Rachel barely spoke to me. She cooked meals without asking what I liked. She washed my clothes but kept them folded in a pile instead of putting them in my closet. Small things, but they carried meaning. And Daniel, busy with work, didn't notice how those small things were shaping the air around us. One afternoon, I made his favorite stew, chicken with potatoes, slow cooked the way he loved since childhood. When he came home, I smiled and said, "Look what I made." Rachel was behind him, her arms crossed. She said, "Oh, we already ate out. You didn't have to cook." Daniel nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Mama, you should have waited for me to call." I looked at the pot on the stove and whispered, "It's okay. I'll save it for tomorrow." But I knew tomorrow would come and the stew would still be untouched. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how easily my son had changed. He used to look at me with gratitude. Now he looked at me with quiet irritation, like I was a responsibility instead of his mother. I told myself maybe it was natural. Maybe this was what life did. It pulled children away and made mothers learn how to let go. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't just time. It was influence. It was someone whispering gently, shaping his thoughts one day at a time. One afternoon, Rachel called me into the living room. She said, "Mama, can we talk for a second?" Her tone was sweet but stiff. I sat down. She began, "I know you mean well, but I think Daniel depends on you too much. He doesn't make his own choices when you're around. He worries about you all the time, and it's affecting our marriage." I stared at her, unsure what to say. She continued, "We need some space to build our life. I think you should consider spending some time with your sister or maybe visiting friends for a few months." My hands trembled. I said quietly, "This is my home too." She smiled, that kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Of course it is, but sometimes space makes love grow stronger." It was such a clever way of saying, "Leave." Before I could answer, Daniel walked in. He looked uncomfortable. "Rachel told me about your talk. I think maybe it's a good idea, Mama, just for a little while." A little while? Those two words burned, because in my heart, I knew if I left, I might never come back. I looked at my son and said softly, "If that's what you want, I'll go." He tried to hug me, but I stepped back. I didn't want him to see me cry. That evening, I packed a small bag. Not much, just a few clothes and some photos. Rachel came to my door and said, "I'll call you a cab in the morning." I nodded. She turned to leave, then said over her shoulder, "Don't worry, Mama, this will be good for everyone." When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. The jasmine outside the window was still blooming. It felt like the only thing in that house that cared I was leaving. I stayed awake until morning, watching the light creep through the curtains. When the cab arrived, Daniel was already gone for work. He didn't even wait to see me off. Rachel stood by the door and said, "Take care of yourself." Then she closed the door behind me. As the car drove away, I looked back through the window. The house stood still, quiet, almost proud in its silence. And just like that, the place that once felt like home was gone. I went to stay with my friend Maria for a while. She lived in a small apartment across town. When she saw me at her door with a suitcase, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged me and said, "Stay as long as you need." For the first few days, I didn't talk much. I just helped her with chores and kept to myself. At night, I lay awake thinking about Daniel, wondering if he missed me, wondering if Rachel told him I was okay. He didn't call. Not once. Each day that passed without his voice felt like another thread snapping loose from my heart. Maria would sometimes say, "Give him time, dear. He'll come around." I smiled and nodded, but I knew the truth. Sometimes when people turn away, they don't come back. Not because they stop loving you, but because someone convinces you you're easier to forget. One afternoon, about 3 weeks later, I decided to call him myself. He answered after a few rings. His voice was polite, almost formal. "Hey, Mama, how are you?" "I'm fine. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. "Rachel says hi." I swallowed hard. "Tell her I said hello." He cleared his throat. "I've been busy with work. I'll come by soon." I knew he wouldn't, but I didn't say that. I just said, "Take care of yourself, my son." When the call ended, I stared at the phone for a long time. It's strange how silence can sound louder than words. Days turned into weeks, and I started to realize something painful. Rachel hadn't just turned Daniel against me. She had slowly erased me from his world. It wasn't anger or cruelty. It was quiet, patient distance. And sometimes that's more powerful than hate. Time moves differently when your heart is tired. Some days felt endless. Others slipped away like they never happened. At Maria's place, I tried to keep myself busy, cooking, folding laundry, helping her water the plants. But no matter what I did, a part of me kept waiting for the phone to ring. It never did. I'd see mothers walking with their grown children on the street, laughing, talking, just ordinary moments. And I think, that used to be me and Daniel. Now he was living his life and I was just a memory that didn't fit in his new one. One evening, Maria brought me a cup of tea and said softly, "You can't keep waiting forever, dear. Sometimes children take time to see the truth. But in the meantime, you have to live too." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "I know. I'm trying." She smiled kindly. "You're stronger than you think." I didn't feel strong. I felt like an old photograph, faded at the edges, forgotten in a drawer. A month later, I got sick with a bad flu. Maria took me to the clinic, and while I sat in the waiting room, something inside me shifted. I realized Daniel didn't even know. He didn't know I was sick or lonely or even alive in that moment. And strangely, that thought didn't hurt as sharply as before. It just made me quiet. Maybe that's what healing looks like sometimes. Not happiness, just quiet acceptance. A few weeks after that, Maria suggested we go to the park. It was a sunny afternoon. Families were everywhere. Kids running, mothers talking, old couples holding hands. I sat on a bench under a tree and watched them, smiling faintly. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mama?" I turned around slowly. It was Daniel. He looked older somehow, tired, maybe even guilty. I stood up, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I went to the house and Rachel told me you moved in with a friend. I didn't know it would be this long." I looked at him, unsure what to say. "I thought you wanted space," I said softly. His eyes filled with tears. "I did, or maybe I thought I did. But Mama, the house doesn't feel right without you." I wanted to hold him, to forgive everything right there. But years of silence don't disappear in one apology. So I just asked quietly, "How's Rachel?" He hesitated. "She left." I blinked. "Left?" He nodded. "We argued a lot after you went away. She said I wasn't the same anymore, that I was too attached to the past. One day she packed up and went to her mother's. We haven't spoken since." He looked down. I guess I learned too late what really mattered. I sighed. We all learn late, son. That's how life teaches us. We sat together on the bench. The air was still, except for the sound of children laughing in the distance. He said quietly, "I wanted to come see you sooner, but I was ashamed." I smiled sadly. "You were young, Daniel, and love makes us blind sometimes. I've been blind too." He looked up. "Can you forgive me?" I reached for his hand. "There's nothing to forgive. I only wanted you to be happy." He nodded, tears running down his face. "I thought Rachel needed me to choose. I didn't realize choosing her didn't mean losing you." I squeezed his hand gently. "Some people make us believe love is limited, but it's not. There's room for everyone if the heart is kind." After that day, Daniel started visiting me often. He'd bring groceries, sit for tea, ask about my health. At first, I thought it was guilt, but over time, it felt different, softer, steadier. One day he said, "Mama, would you come home? I fixed your old room." I smiled. "It's okay, son. You need your space. I'm fine here." But he insisted. "It's not about space anymore. It's about family." So I went back. The house looked the same walls, same garden, same quiet. But something was missing. Not Rachel, but the warmth that used to fill the air. I walked through the room slowly, touching the furniture, the photographs, the window frames. It felt like walking through a memory that had forgiven me. When I reached the kitchen, Daniel was standing there, watching me. He said, "I want things to be right again, Mama." I looked at him and said softly, "Then start by being kind to yourself. You've already made it right by coming back." He hugged me, really hugged me, like he used to when he was a little boy afraid of storms. And in that moment, all the hurt melted away. The days that followed were quiet but peaceful. We didn't talk much about Rachel or what happened. Some wounds don't need words. They just need time and gentleness. Every morning, I'd go out to the garden again. The jasmine had grown wild, but I didn't trim it right away. I liked how it had taken over, blooming freely in every direction. It reminded me that life does that too. It grows back, even after being cut down. Sometimes, when the evenings turn golden and the house feels calm, Daniel sits beside me on the porch. We drink tea in silence, and he says, "You know, Mama, I wish I had listened sooner." And I always tell him the same thing. It's never too late to come home. I don't hate Rachel. I don't even blame her anymore. Some people hurt others because they're afraid of losing control. Some because they never learned what real love looks like. I just hope she finds peace too, wherever she is. As for me, I've stopped waiting for things to be the way they were. Now, I just wake up each morning, thank God for another day, and take care of the garden that once made me feel small, but now reminds me how strong I've become. And maybe that's how every story of heartbreak should end. Not with revenge or bitterness, but with quiet strength and a heart that still knows how to love, even after being broken.